Hi, Brittyn. Thank you so much for coming on the Thrival Nutrition podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much.
I'm so happy that you're here. I know we're going to be talking about the link with like diet and autism, and I can't really wait to hear your story actually about what brought you into this niche in nutrition. So let's start off with who you are and what you do.
Awesome. So like you said, my name is Brittyn Coleman. I'm a registered dietitian, and I specialize in kids on the autism spectrum. Really, my practice is working with parents who have kids with autism so that I can help teach them the ways that they can help their children, whether it's through diet or through supplements or through other lifestyle changes. And so I really work one-on-one with the parents to help impact their child who has nutrition or who has autism and nutrition issues. So that ranges a lot of different things, and we'll go into that, I'm sure, but from gut issues, which are the most common, to picky eating, from sensory processing disorder and sensory sensitivities, and to nutrient deficiencies and food intolerances. And there's really such a wide range, and a lot of people don't realize what's going on in that niche. I skipped my intro a little bit. I'm in San Francisco is where I'm located. I do everything, just too excited about my practice. I do everything over video, so I actually see a lot of clients across the US. A lot of my clientele is California-based. I'm from Oklahoma, so I still have a lot of clients in Oklahoma too. So yeah.
That's awesome. I'm glad I could bring you on because I know actually a lot of moms have like reached out to me for like nutrition, and I know we'll talk about labs, and I do run a couple labs, but I feel like I just love that you are so much more knowledgeable in this area because I know a lot of parents. I feel like honestly the most motivated parents I've ever met in my life are parents with kids that have autism. They are so motivated. They will do anything. I think it's so motivating for me as a mom. I'm like, you're amazing, because I know they just want their kids to feel the best that they can with the circumstances they were given. So I'm completely in awe of all the parents. I'm like, you guys are amazing. So what brought you into this niche?
Well, I have a younger brother who's on the autism spectrum. He was diagnosed when he was 2. So crazy thing is, my mom's a psychologist, and she specializes in autism, but she actually specialized before he was born. And so
Wow.
it was it was meant to be. So he really got the help that he needed because of the early signs that she was able to see. And so she got him in therapies and speech and OT and ABA. And another thing, I'm just so impressed with moms because they balance so many things, and dads, they balance so many things when they have a kid on the spectrum. And you just don't realize how many therapies there are, like I said, from OT and speech and ABA, but down to like PCIT and then behavioral therapy and all of these other things, and the nutrition fits in there too. It's a lot. So growing up, I saw how all these therapies that he was going through, and I saw that progression for him. And I also got to see how nutrition played a role in that. And from finding out a lot of his issues and sensitivities with nutrition, it actually helped me a lot too. Siblings are if you look at the research between individuals with autism, their siblings, and then the typical population, you see that a lot of kids with autism have severe gut issues, food sensitivities, all these other things. Siblings are also similarly affected, though not as much. It's more mild, and then the typical population, you really don't see much of that. And so from food sensitivities, I've been gluten and dairy free for almost 20 years, and I have just really been able to take care of my health because I was able to see how important that was to him growing up and how that really made a difference for him. So I made it my business because it's so special to me. Yeah.
That's amazing. So I would love to talk kind of about triggers, and we briefly talked about before we started recording, because I think there can be a lot, like with everything, honestly, with a lot of chronic illnesses, whether it's diabetes or heart issues, you name it, stress, food, again, it's a holistic approach. Everything kind of comes together. So I'm sure it's that same way with autism as well, with different triggers, with underlying genetics and whatnot. So I'd love for you to dive into that.
Totally. So we don't know what causes autism. I'll start out saying that. The research, we're still trying to figure it out. And what everybody says is that it's a combination of genetic and environmental causes. But that's just about as basic and, as you can get there. We just really don't know. So it can be very controversial on what causes that. So anybody listening, just completely hear me out on that. So what I believe is that there are many kids that have these underlying genetic issues or underlying nutrient deficiency or toxicity of certain nutrients already based on where they live or where they grow up, or just how they're made, how, their genetic makeup, that if we introduce something like a trigger on top of that, like a vaccine, not saying that all vaccines cause autism or else we would all have autism, but it can be a trigger. And so we just have to think about how healthy is this child? What are the underlying genetic issues going on here? Are they at high risk to have, any of these triggers really trigger them? So we just really have to think about, the underlying issues there. And what I do in my practice is look at underlying issues all the time, looking at root causes and, how we can treat those underlying issues instead of just putting the Band-Aid on the symptoms. So just leading into what I actually really do. But yeah, I think that's a really helpful question. And I think everyone needs to do the research and look into that and see what's best for their family.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it all turns on like me and you both like love root causes, love kind of getting to know what is the underlying. And unfortunately, just like in our society, in our environment, there's just more and more toxins in the environment, whether that's vaccines or whether that's our cleaning products or just the air we freaking breathe. I mean, so much has changed from 1940 that like it's working against us a little bit. And so like I always say, like taking control of what we can control, which is our food, the environment as much as possible in the sense of like what you're putting on your skin and things like that, really matters. And I feel like that is actually one of the most major things that we can do and gives people a little bit of hope and not despair as we think there's just too many toxins in this world. I can't really do anything about it. So I would love to first dive into one of the root causes with anything neuro autism is gut health, because our gut is known as our second brain. So love to geek out on what you see in your practice with kids who have autism and then their gut health. I think that would be fascinating.
Oh, I can geek out on gut health forever. And this could be the root of our, we could talk about this the whole podcast. Yeah. But so the gut really is the second brain. A lot of our immune system is based there. We have trillions and trillions of bacteria that live there, and they really just make up this biome. And then you have your holobiome, which is the bacteria throughout your body, and on your skin and your mouth, all those things too. But those bacteria just play such a huge role in our digestion and how we get our nutrients, and also how healthy our gut or our the lining of our gut is and how strong it is. And our food sensitivities can also be based in poor bacteria. There's just so many things that just come down to root cause of gut issues. An imbalance of bacteria in the gut is called dysbiosis. And so that dysbiosis, which means that you usually have more bad bacteria than good, is what we commonly see in autism. And so what a lot of the research is showing is that we have dysbiosis, the imbalance of bacteria. It can cause a lot of, we have this huge nerve that runs from our gut to our brain. So we have to think about how it translates between our gut and our brain and how they talk back and forth. And the gut bacteria can play a huge role in that. Also, in reverse, our anxiety and our mental health. If we're having a lot of issues with anxiety and neurological issues, it can actually talk to our gut and it can mess up our gut biome. So it's just interesting how they both can talk back and forth, and how it's so important if you do have anxiety, or if you have autism, or some other neurological issue, that it's important you get your gut in line, because you're only fixing half the problem if you're not looking at the gut. So fixing gut biome, normalizing that's what I do in a lot of my clients, from nutrition and nutrition supplements.
Yes, definitely. And I think something that I've actually know one of my friends who had a child with autism, and he's literally the cutest thing in the world. She actually, which is outside of our scope, but did stool transplants.
Mm-hmm.
And she with the healthy stool and put it in him, and she saw such a good improvement. He wasn't speaking. Pretty sure he's speaking now. It's been a while since I talked to her, but she was so impressed with it. And I don't think it's as common. I actually think they're trying to stop it. She was trying to explain to me that her doctor had to do it like on the low. So I don't know if it's like a common treatment or whatnot, but she saw crazy good improvement, and she did do stool testing. So there was definitely imbalances that she knew about. And that just kind of shows like so much of what could change when our microbiome is like working and all together and optimal, and we can digest our foods properly and absorb the nutrients. And it's always the first place to start, even like outside of autism, like hormones, whatever. And people are looking at me like, why are we talking about my poop and like my gut? And I'm trying to explain to them like, it's all interconnected. It's the first thing you have to really look at.
Yep, I agree. I totally agree. A lot of really interesting research has been coming out about the fecal transplants and autism, and yeah, exactly what you're saying, seeing these really, really positive benefits from it. It is pretty invasive, so, getting bowel movement into your body, it's just not a normal procedure. So it's it is pretty invasive, so not a lot of people do it, and I really don't know very many people who offer doing it. So
Yeah.
you may be right. I would be surprised if they were going to stop doing it because of the positive
Yeah.
feedback that we've gotten from research. But again, I don't know even if I wanted to refer somebody to do it, who I would refer them to. I'd really have to research that. But I have clients who will come to me saying, we really want to do this. Can you do this? Of course, it's outside of my realm, so I couldn't do that. But I can do it in a more natural sense. So we can change the gut biome, and the gut biome can actually change pretty quickly. And so depending on your environment or your diet or what you're putting into your gut. And so we can actually change the gut makeup within a few months if you're following a regimented diet and supplement regimen. So there are other ways that are less invasive to change the gut biome. So it's not the fecal transplant isn't the end all be all. There's other options, but it can be really helpful, not only for autism, but for obesity and for other chronic diseases. So it's really interesting to me. Yeah.
Yeah. I love the research connecting the gut towards everything. It's so fascinating. And I know actually with the regimens and things like that, especially on my side, which I don't really work with children, so I don't have this too much of people like, there's lots of bone broth and just healthy foods, and maybe foods that sound really gross to kids, especially if they have like a sensory issue. How does that work?
Yeah. So having a diet laid out for a kid that will make them better versus getting that into their body, you just really have to think about sensory issues. So autism, for maybe people listening who aren't familiar with autism, just at the core of it, it's kids with autism usually have very severe sensory issues. So if you think about noise and smell, my brother actually has to wear, they're almost, it feels like reverse hearing aids because they look like they are earplugs, but they funnel out the noise. They help make it less intense because he can hear so well. It's just so sensitive to him. We could never listen to music in the car when we were younger because it really hurt his ears. And so, kids with autism, they can see really well, or certain colors or patterns may cause them issues. Tags on skin may be really bothersome to them because of that sensory issue. My brother had to wear his socks inside out because he couldn't stand, and he still does that. He's 24. And you can't stand the feel of the seam. So you just have to think about these sensory issues. And then when it comes to eating, it's our most sensory rich experience all at once. You smell the food, you taste it, you feel it in your mouth, you hear the crunch, you feel the temperature, you're looking at the different colors. It's just so overwhelming if you have a sensory issue, or specifically sensory processing disorder. And that's just, the way that we falsely identify certain senses. So when it comes to eating, it's no wonder that kids with autism have these issues because it's so many senses at once. And so what you can do for that, first, I always recommend that they're doing speech or occupational therapy, because those are very helpful to help with sensory desensitization and to help with those maybe oral sensory issues, that they can help with that. But then when we're talking about feeding, we can do different types of feeding therapy that apply specifically to kids who have sensory issues. So there's one kind of feeding therapy that I use and that I've gone to the training for, and I fully believe that it's the best option for sensory processing disorder and autism, and it's called SOS feeding therapy. SOS stands for sequential oral sensory. So it's specifically for kids who have sensory issues. And how this is made up is it's by I actually believe she's a psychologist, based in Denver, Colorado. And her name is Dr. Kay Toomey, and she teaches healthcare professionals all across the US on how to become an SOS feeding therapist. So I went to the one in Seattle, and it was wonderful. But what you do, it's essentially taking each sense and breaking it down and creating these different building blocks. And so the first thing that you're going to work on is just tolerating the food, just seeing it and being in the same place as the food. If a child's had a stressful experience around food or really just has a severe sensory issue, they honestly can't tolerate the food in the room or even on the table. Try getting it onto their plate. There's no way that you're just going to get them to eat that food if they're having this severe anxiety about it or this sensory issue. And so just making them eat that food from that point is just going to cause so much more of an issue than working on each step one at a time. And so tolerating that goes first, interacting with the food, whether it's with a toy or with its a fork, or just essentially playing with the food. You don't have to touch it in that stage. The next one is smelling. So actually getting, whether you're wafting it toward your face or it's sitting on the table, or leaning down to smell it, building that into it as well. And then we go into touching, and that's your hands, but also your face and your lips and how it feels on your tongue. You don't have to eat it, but actually getting the sensory experience of that food. From there, it's putting it in your mouth. So whether you chew it and spit it out, which spitting it out is a step. It seems counterintuitive, and a lot of parents don't want their kids just spitting food everywhere. But if you teach it as an exit strategy, on a way that if their child tries a new food, they don't have to swallow it. They can spit it in their napkin, we can throw it away, and it's the end of it. It actually encourages kids to eat it because they know that once it's in their mouth, if they're not ready, they can put a halt to it and they can stop. And that is really great to know, that they can still have some of that control when all these other sensory issues are out of their control. So from just tasting it, then we go to actually eating it. So there are actually 30 steps that go in between just seeing it for the first time and actually eating it. So just explaining that to parents, that that's the reason their kid isn't eating, and that's the reason their child will throw a tantrum or will physically throw up at the table. It's not just because they're a picky eater. They actually are a selective eater, a problem feeder, and there's more to it than just not wanting to eat a food and being picky. So that's another just educational thing. It's a lot harder than you realize when your child does have sensory issues, like true sensory issues.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, 30 steps.
Mm-hmm.
But I can only imagine, I feel like even just graduating from step to step and getting closer to the end of feeding it, I don't know, that's kind of motivating in itself, that I feel like it would be like, okay, this is working. And that's awesome that you're able to guide parents through that, because I feel like that process, if anything, I would need guidance. Yes. And I would want to be working with someone that knows exactly like how to do that. For sure.
Exactly. And that's also why I say you need to I can help you find a SOS feeding therapist in your area. They have this really awesome therapist finder. So while I help with parents and kind of help with how they'll do that at home, because sometimes parents will get left out of it and they don't go into therapy, which they should. But sometimes it's just there's a disconnect, and they need to be reminded what foods we should be using. We shouldn't be working on Reese's Pieces through these steps if it's not going to be something that helps. So just making the connection, but their child usually needs the one-on-one therapy, which obviously me being in San Francisco and my clients usually not being, that's not something I provide. So they do need that one-on-one therapy if it's a severe feeding issue.
Right. But I mean, you can see people virtually for coaching the parents and things like that as well.
Exactly. So that's a part of my program that I do, and helping parents with that and how they can actually understand their child, because a lot of parents will get really frustrated. And if they don't understand what's going on, then it's understandable that they would feel frustrated. So sometimes it just gives a little empathy to understanding where the child is coming from and putting yourself in their shoes. So I always think that's an important place to be, because it's easy to get angry with a child when you can't understand what's going on.
Totally. And that's just me having picky eaters. I mean, not having any sensory, just picky eaters in general. And that's frustrating. But I feel like with anything like discipline, but not when it's super easy to feel frustrated and angry and react if even just discipline a kid just does something wrong. But knowing and the education, like you said, behind it, and knowing like, okay, they're probably tired or they want time from you. That's really why they're acting out. Honestly, just knowing, just having that knowledge, it makes parenting a little bit easier, because you're like, okay, you take a step back. Don't react in like anger. They're probably just wanting to spend time with you. I mean, and that in itself could be solving. So I feel like I've personally seen that where that's huge. We're just honestly just understanding the child and being able to react in that way, whether it's with food, behavior, whatever. And so I'd love to talk about food sensitivities, because I know with autism, it's all about reducing a lot of inflammation that's going on. And I know that we use the same food sensitivity test, the MRT. So I would love for you to talk about that and the success you've seen with kids with autism.
Definitely. So because kids with autism are more likely to have gut issues, they are also more likely to have food sensitivities. So the most common sensitivities that we see are gluten and dairy. And that's, the research on a gluten-free, casein-free diet has been done, and there's a lot of research studies out there. Some say yes, it helps. Some say no, it doesn't. And the truth is, it just comes down to the individual. And not every single person with autism is going to have a sensitivity to gluten or a sensitivity to dairy. And though they're more likely to, but when we can test, we can see if it's going to be helpful or if they actually are having this reaction or not. So I would be so interested to look at all of the research that's been done, and for gluten and dairy-free diets, to see if they go back and let's do some blood panels and let's do the MRT and see if they actually have sensitivities and if that correlates with how successful the diet was. And it of course would. So the MRT food sensitivity test tests for about 170 different foods, from dairy products to grain products, vegetables, fruits, food chemicals and naturally occurring chemicals, to flavors, food flavors and herbs and things like that. So, and meats and seafood, so many things. Yeah. So it's really helpful for my kids. And I've really seen that, especially in behavior. I actually had a kid last week who we took them off dairy, and it made the biggest difference for that parent. And she just honestly couldn't believe it. From a behavioral side, she wasn't having, the tantrums and these bursts of anger. And then also her GI system, she wasn't being chronically constipated, which she used to be so constipated that it would bleed, and it normalized out. It was really sad. We did a GI map test on her too, and it was just,
I love the GI map.
I do too. But we did it before she did the dairy-free diet, and the blood that came back on that was really high, the occult blood in the stool. And her mom was like, yeah, she just bleeds all the time because it's just she's so constipated. And so by taking out that dairy, she's now having normal bowel movements, and that was within just a week's time. Just by taking out dairy. We hadn't even started supplements yet. So she just noticed so many changes in her child from a mood and behavior standpoint, but also GI standpoint, that it's just from just one change, it just makes me so excited how much nutrition can actually do. But the MRT has been really helpful for my clients. Sometimes we have to do it in a little bit of a roundabout way because a lot of my clients are so selective in the foods that they eat. A lot of times I can't do a full protocol with them because they're only eating 5 foods to begin with. So it helps us get an idea what foods we need to be transitioning to better options, and it would be less inflammatory to them. And a lot of times that makes parents feel better that we can make those small transitions. But if I have kids who have an extensive diet and are having severe issues, we can do the full protocol with MRT, and it's very helpful.
Yeah.
So it just depends where the child is, and just every population. I think you have to tailor your protocol a little bit, but it's been extremely helpful for me. So I love using that. And the GI map has been life-changing for my clients.
Yeah, I love the GI map. It's one of my favorite ones, and definitely probably the gold standard in stool testing for sure.
I agree. And it's so cool to see how the MRT and the GI map correlate, because if you see a high calprotectin, which is inflammation in the gut, or you see these other, high zonulin, so leaky gut, or all these other things are, major inflammation markers in the gut, you're saying, well, if we haven't done MRT yet, we really need to look into this, because it's likely that these food sensitivities are also causing some major inflammation issues in the gut. So I like to do them together if I can, if we're able to do both at the same time.
Definitely. I think another marker that's helpful is SIGA. And I love that because I actually see it low a lot of the times. And I don't work with, autism, but just a lot of people just have very low functioning immune system in the gut. And that naturally will increase your risk of having more food sensitivities and food allergies. And it's, like I said, it's hand in hand.
Yeah, and if it's high, the other side of it. If it's high, then it also shows us our immune system is reacting strongly.
Fighting something.
There's something going on there too. So it's just, I love it. Especially my kids who are nonverbal. They can't explain that they're having these discomforts, and a lot of times they'll act out behaviorally because they're having so many GI issues. They won't sleep, which causes more behavior issues if you're not sleeping.
Yeah.
And so it's cool to be able to just take a look inside and what's going on and how can we best help them when they can't tell us what they need. So it's that's really exciting for me to be able
Definitely.
to.
And I think that MRT too, it's foods, like I've seen the craziest foods that people least expect of being inflammatory to them, like salmon, which is supposed to be very anti-inflammatory, but to them it's not. And so I'm the same way. That bio-individuality and really figuring out what works for you is so important. And I think it's a game changer because, right, everyone's just trying, all right, I heard this, I read this on a blog, let's try this. And they're just kind of throwing things to a wall and see what sticks. And I feel like the MRT, GI map, micronutrient, all that really solves like, all right, this is what's going on with your biochemical individuality. Let's see where we can improve it. And kind of going into like micronutrient deficiencies, what deficiencies are you seeing the most with kids that have autism?
Well, starting out, I use SpectraCell. I'm not sure if you.
Me too.
Awesome.
Basically the same.
I love that. So, I do my basic. I just do the SpectraCell micronutrient panel plus the omega check. And then often we'll just do a CMP and CBC just to make sure everything's good. And usually it is. And my older kids, sometimes I'll see young adults also. And if they have obesity issues, or even I have kids who are obese as, teenagers, we'll do a cardiometabolic panel too, just to make sure everything is looking okay. And then also do hormone panels if we see it's needed. But with the micronutrient panels, the most common I see almost always, the B panel is out of whack. So all the B vitamins, especially folate and B12, I usually see those functionally deficient or borderline deficient. And then a lot of other ones like biotin, B6, I see vitamins B1 through 3 off a lot. But I would say, B6, biotin, B12, and folate are the ones that I see the most common. Vitamin D is almost always low, but I feel like that's all of the US. So I don't know if that's specific to autism, but I see that low a lot. And
I don't think I've actually ever seen someone with optimal levels. Ever.
Yeah, it's an issue. And then I also see, looking at antioxidants, I see glutathione that will be low. But when we look at all those and look at the patterns that we see, whenever we have gut issues or dysbiosis, the ones that we commonly see low are vitamin D, which affects the diversity of the bacteria in our gut. B vitamins, a lot of times those are made in the gut, especially biotin, but also our methylation and our genetic mutations and how we can actually absorb nutrients. That's usually off in autism. And then like glutamine or glutathione, those are very important for the gut. And so when I see those low too, especially with vitamin D and biotin, that kind of triggers me, okay, we need to look further here. If we haven't done GI map testing, we need to look into that because it's likely they have dysbiosis. And then that leads into a lot of times we look at the GI map and there's inflammation and it doesn't, there's something more. So we do MRT, and I'm in the process of developing a course or like a 6-month program for my clients, so it can be a little more comprehensive, so we can do all of those tests instead of just gradually doing it, so that it can be a little bit more regimented. So I'm in the process of making that right now. But
that's awesome. Yeah, no, I love ditto. I mean, people will pick, and obviously we recommend which test to start with best. And I'm always like almost recommending stool, but some people are like, well, I just want to check nutrients first or whatnot. Yeah. And then like you said, like you do see though, if there's a lot of deficiencies, especially your Bs, there's probably something going on GI. Mm-hmm. But it's helpful because again, I think it all ties back to gut health. We just got to make sure that supplements, food, we're just digesting and absorbing, so we can get the most out of the foods that we're eating, especially if a kid is very picky and they only have a select few foods. Optimizing that as much as we can would be ideal.
Totally.
Do you have anything else you'd like to add on what you see a lot, nutrients, stool?
Well, just what you just said, kind of tying that back into gut health too. So for kids with autism, the reason that they a lot of times have this dysbiosis or imbalance of bacteria, we see a lot of kids are born with it. With autism, they will have a compromised gut anyway. They'll have many rounds of antibiotics, which can really affect their gut. Well, it completely affects their gut biome. Or they'll have many ear infections throughout their lifetime and just be on rounds and rounds of antibiotics. But also when they have such a selective diet that a lot of times is so limited, if they're only eating 5 to 10 different foods, and those foods are chicken nuggets and french fries and chips and, who knows what other processed food, then that food isn't feeding the gut bacteria that they need. And so it's just this big cycle. Another thing we can test with GI map is yeast, and I commonly see candida or yeast overgrowth in my clients. And what yeast can do is it can make the host feel like you need sugar or you need carbohydrates or you need starch. And so then it just starts this whole nother process. And so getting kids breaking that cycle and getting them out of that and helping their gut health, a lot of times they start to expand. Once their gut isn't hurting so much, then they'll be more likely to expand their food. So diet and expansion is our long-term goal. Getting their gut healthy and using supplements and what we can with diet is our short term. So diet doesn't change overnight, especially in kids with sensory sensitivities. So it's important we stick with it and stay consistent and work on the underlying issue to help expand their diet. So just wanted to connect the dots there since we talked about everything, why kids with autism have severe gut issues.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, please let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, I am online at autismdietitian.com. So for anybody who is unsure how to correctly spell dietitian, it's dietian. I only say that because autism dietitian with a C is taken by another nutritionist, not even a dietitian. So I just want to make sure that everyone goes to the right page. You can find me on Facebook.
Canadian way or another country way of spelling it?
I think it is. I think it, but the US way is the T is correct. Yeah. And then you can also find me on Facebook, Autism Dietitian. That's where I'm most active, is on Facebook. And then I also have Instagram and Twitter. Those are a little less active. But Facebook and my website are the best places to find me.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I appreciate you sharing all your information.
Yes, of course. If anyone's interested, you can also schedule a free 30-minute consult with me. So if anybody wants to go on there and talk to me a little bit about their child or their young adult who has autism, definitely reach out and I'd love to talk about it. But thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm appreciative and just love what you're doing with everything.